Hey, have you ever wondered what makes Shrewsbury such a great town? I think about it all the time. That's why I decided to create the Shrewsbury Biscuit podcast, a place where we can sit and talk to people from all walks of life, listen to stories about what makes this town such a great place to live. We are going to be talking to authors and historians, artists and musicians, entrepreneurs, and people that have got great stories to tell about this town. Welcome to the Shrewsbury Biscuit podcast. So, hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to episode number 1 of the Shrewsbury Biscuit. This is a show designed to capture the essence of what makes Shrewsbury really special. I've got to explain first. My name's Alex Whiteley. I'm your host. I'm going to be here every week in your ears. And I am not from Shrewsbury. I came here about 18 months ago. I've kind of lived here, there, and everywhere. And I fell hard in love with the town. And I really wanted to understand what is so special about this town, because I really do love this place and I can't imagine myself living anywhere else. So my mission is going to be to interview people from the town and get them to explain to me what's special about Shrewsbury. We're going to be talking to all sorts of people. We got authors and musicians, entrepreneurs coming in, artists, all kinds of people from all walks of life. You know, they're going to come in and speak to me and tell me, you know, why this place is so special, and give them guys a bit of a platform to talk about what they do, even if it's a great story about the town they've got. You know, whether we promote the town or whatever it is you do in the town, this is what this show is going to be about. And today is our first guest on the show is Simon Bell, who's a local author. How's it going, Simon? You okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you had to drive around quite a bit to try and find where we are. It's quite awkward, isn't it?
The side streets of Shrewsbury that don't exist on a map.
We get it all the time. I mean, I had a Amazon guy ranting and raving at me the other day. He's like, "I've been looking for your house for 30 minutes." He was a bit frustrated. You know, Amazon guys are time. The time constrained anyway. So yeah, it is quite frustrating. So Simon, tell us a bit about yourself. What is it that brings you here today? You know,
I'm a sort of mixed package, really. I have the luxury of being a moderately young man, not too young, but to have been able to retire early from my previous career. So for many years, I was a mental health nurse, some 35 years.
Oh, that's interesting.
Prior to that, I did a couple of years of proper nursing, general nursing, but I was no good at that. So I fell into mental health nursing, which I absolutely loved. And that was my career up until the age of 55. And I worked in various branches of that sphere of healthcare, from hospital environments through to the community, through to sort of 22 years of dealing with suspects, defendants, offenders, people who came to the attention of the police and the courts and probation, prison service, whenever there were concerns that they may have mental health problems. So that was career-wise, in a small nutshell, what I did. Who am I beyond that? I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I'm a Salopian, not by birth, but my parents moved here when I was a young child, so I'm an adopted Salopian, and this is my hometown. It's where I've lived for the vast majority of my life. And as you mentioned, I'm an author.
Yeah. And what is it that you write? We spoke before about the books that you've got out at the moment. What is it you like to write?
Well, I've written 2 books solely in my name and one as a co-authored book. My interest, and this stems back from my early nursing career, my early mental health nursing career, is the Holocaust and genocide, and looking at intolerance and hatred and how damaging and potentially harmful that can be. So I've written one book specifically on the Holocaust, and I guess we might come back to that a bit later on. I've written another book that looks at tribalism, prejudice, the rise of the far right, and the politics of hatred, not just in this country but worldwide, and what can be done to challenge that. And then I've co-authored a book, more of a booklet really, a sort of manual of tolerance is how we've described it, and that's co-written with a man called Rainer Herse, who is the grandson of Rudolf Höss, who was the main commandant of Auschwitz-Birkenau, so the man responsible for the worst killing factory in history, the worst genocide in history. Rainer and I are close friends. We've known each other for a few years, and he commendably deals with the legacy of his family history by working today to challenge hate, to make sure that the lessons of the past are remembered, and that we try and do something to speak up for the oppressed and the vulnerable and those that
that's really
others
good.
in society.
That's really good, especially today when we're kind of teetering on the edge of what's right and what's wrong, especially with the inclusion of sort of social media, where people can tend to kind of get away with writing things and just disappearing. These trolls that can come in and be like, "You're this and you're that, and I hate you," and they do. And I'm an experienced podcaster who works very well with social media, and I see it a lot on a daily basis. Do you think that's an issue?
Social media is very powerful. If you look at the politics of the past, if you look at, say, the Nazi era and the rise of fascism in Italy and in Spain, they relied on rallies, they relied on newspapers, they relied on the radio and on
the movement.
Yeah. Today, the rallies are via social media. They're via Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat, and where people can share information fairly readily, and they don't need to be in a crowd. You don't need to make yourself known. You can do it anonymously, and you can reach tens of thousands or even millions of people just by posting whatever you want to post. And the algorithms of social media.
Yeah, we've all seen that spider chart where it kind of
those posts will reach out to people who are of a similar mindset or who are receptive to that. It becomes almost like confirmation bias, that if you lean towards conspiracy theories about the moon landing, you'll get lots of information popping up on Facebook or Twitter or wherever about the falseness of the moon landing or the Kennedy assassination or the death of Princess Diana.
And YouTube is terrible for that, because you can type in how to boil an egg and you can watch that video, and within like 5, if you click on the videos that are linked to that, if you click on one and then click on another, just going on what it suggests for you to listen to, I think within about 5 or 6, 7 even clicks, you're talking about conspiracy theories. And that's because you're talking about algorithms, and algorithms talk on kind of averages. They kind of what's more likely to be clicked, and it's because so many people look at these videos that it thinks you want to look at it. So that's why it leads you in that direction, and it's quite scary. It's really scary, I think.
Well, I'm trying to think of a good example. If you type in on Google, there are other search agents, but if you do a Google search of 9/11 false, you will end up with hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of posts or potential sources of information that will confirm that. Some of them will be repeated, but there's a market out there for conspiracies, and there's a market out there for the propaganda of hate and intolerance that has taken over from the mass rallies of the past, which is part of my interest.
And like you talking about Auschwitz and things like that, these are lessons that we should have learned, and we kind of ignoring that. So do you think it's a generational thing? Do you think it's something that we'll always go back to? Or I don't know, is there an inspiration there from those lessons?
I don't know if it's generational, because across the generations you'll find people who still buy into the rhetoric of hate, but you'll also find across generations people who passionately believe that we should learn the lessons of the past and that we should be more tolerant and understanding and reaching out to those more vulnerable. Is it generational? Probably not. I think people have always been tribal, and that's an issue. And if you live in the strange world that I live in, which is constantly researching the Holocaust and other genocides, you'll find a repetition in the words used. The targets change, and the method of conveying a message might change, but by and large, the language is the same. It's just a different target. So in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, for the Nazis of Germany, it was the Jews, it was the Roma, it was the Sinti, it was Bolsheviks, it was the French, the British, the Americans, but mainly those small racial groups. Today there'll be different targets, but the language is very much the same.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of worded it like that is because up until recently, we didn't have access, apart from, unless you're going to go to the library and pull out a book, you didn't have access to all the history and like these amazing pieces of text that you can find, videos, archives. Now you can, you know, you got Netflix, for example. If you go onto Netflix, there are millions of documentaries you can troll through, which are amazing. I've recently just come off a phase of just watching World War II related documentaries, but also information. Like you said, Google, you can type in World War II, and you can find millions, literally millions of bits of media you can read through or look at. We didn't have that until recently. So now we can access that. You're kind of like, oh, that's how I feel about such and such now. You know, they felt that out about Jews. And so, yeah, we can go back to that and act in the same sort of similar ways.
And where the internet differs from the old libraries, and you've still got the world's greatest libraries available on the internet. I'm currently in the latter stages of an MA in Second World War Studies, and I have access online to the biggest library in history. I can find documents written by anyone in any language. They'll be on there. And if I want to find academic articles or books, they'll be within that great library. And I can look at all the sources that those academics have used to create the document that they've written. What a lot of people who use the internet tend to do, unfortunately, is they just take it as read. So you read something on Google or on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram, Snapchat, and because it's there, it must be true. In the same way, the politicians of the past, because they've said it, it must be true. Because it's a headline in a newspaper, it must be true. And I don't wholly buy into this idea of fake news. There are elements of manipulation of news within the mainstream media, but I think it's too easy to. If you start dismissing the press as fake news, you end up into the realms of authoritarian regimes where the press are denied the ability to challenge those in power. But there is an element that, if you see it on a headline or in a social media blog or whatever, because it's there, it must be true. Because a politician says it must be true. There was famous Nazi propagandist Goebbels, who said as early as 1927 that, in talking about not needing to provide proof in propaganda, that Jesus didn't have to provide proof with the Sermon on the Mount. He merely had to say the words and he was believed. And some of the propagandists of the Nazi era and other eras didn't have to provide proof. People today don't have to provide proof. So you'll find online, and you'll find it with some politicians and elements of the press, that they'll say things repeatedly, and those will be repeated by other people. And if they say them with conviction, they're believed, they must be true. Very few people challenge them, and people don't challenge the information that they access. So you can look at Wikipedia. Wikipedia would never be used as an academic source.
No, because anybody can go and write anything on Wikipedia. I can create a Wikipedia and say that Daffy Duck was the 5th president of America or something. You can write that.
And someone will believe it.
Yeah, and someone will believe it. So how do we combat this? How do we go ahead in this day and age? How do you stop this propaganda, this kind of spread of hate? It's like wildfire, isn't it? How do we stop it? Is there a solution?
There's multiple approaches. One is get people to consider the nature of propaganda. In one of my books on the Tribalism and Prejudice book, I looked at some of the research into the power of propaganda and who was more susceptible and receptive to propaganda. Propaganda, when it's anti another group, tends to look at the in-group and the out-group. The out-group are the other, and there'll be a minority group or some group who are less powerful than the majority or more powerful group within the community. Propaganda tends to look at the difference with people and emphasising that. It'll look at, say, for instance, with migrants, people coming into a country, that they present an economic threat or a symbolic threat. So the economic threat is that people are taking all our jobs, our housing, our hospital places, our schools, and all those sort of things. The symbolic threat is that people may be trying to change our culture, our language, our way of life, our religion. Certain groups are more receptive to certain types of propaganda, and there's research to back this up. By and large, and not entirely, people who are less well educated, so people who haven't gone to college, haven't gone to university, don't have higher grade vocational skills, so they're not professionally qualified, tend to buy into the idea of economic threat fairly readily. They'll accept it. people who are better educated or within the professions, and this doesn't cover all because it will apply to both, tend not to buy into solely the economic threat, but they will believe the idea of symbolic threat, that people are going to change culture, language, way of life. Both the less well-educated and well-educated will buy into elements of both. The better educated people, those who are more willing to question, will question propaganda. They're receptive to an alternative opinion. There's a chunk of the population who won't question it at all, so they hear a message and they believe it. Very little is going to change their point of view. So merely saying you're wrong won't work. We have to change the way people think. So get them from almost from day one in school, get children to question the information they're given by teachers, to seek out sources of information when they're doing a history project, when they're studying a poet or a writer or an artist or some period in the past of Britain or Europe or anywhere else. Get them to question sources, get them to access other sources, look at different opinions, look at why someone is conveying a message and whether they may have an agenda and what that agenda is. When they hear a message that sounds appealing, consider whether there are alternative messages and try and balance them out. So for me, I think part of the battle is getting people to question, but also getting people to look at the past. Because if we don't learn from the past, we're destined to repeat the lessons or destined to repeat the mistakes. And we can see it repeatedly in history where those same patterns happen again and again and again. And we look and think, how did that happen again? It's because people didn't learn from the past.
It reminds me of a Jack in the Box, ding a ding a ding a ding a ding a ding a ding. He keeps doing that, and eventually the cons are going to go bam, and that's what happens when people crack. That's when revolutions begin. That's when wars begin. So look, you're an author. How did it happen? How did you become an author? What made you suddenly click and go, I want to write books? What happened there?
It started with one book. It started with the book on Auschwitz-Birkenau, which I don't know if we'll talk about that in more detail.
We can do, yeah.
But that became a work of passion for me. It was almost a madness. I was writing till 1, 2 in the morning and then going to work the next day. I was getting up at 5 in the morning because words would occur to me that I had to write down. The passion behind that book came from visiting Auschwitz-Birkenau on a number of occasions, from meeting survivors of the camp and survivors of other camps within the Nazi regime and the Holocaust, the friendship with the grandson of the commandant of Auschwitz, being almost obsessively preoccupied with trying to make sure the lessons of the past were learned. And when I wrote it, being aware that too obviously in this country and in Europe and elsewhere in America and Australia, the rhetoric of hate was getting some traction. There was some popularity to some of the rhetoric of hate. So for me, it became almost an obsessive need that I had to write this book, that I had to write in a non-academic way that would be accessible to people who didn't know much about the subject, about the history of Nazism, about the history of Auschwitz, about the history of some of the people who were involved in the camp.
Is it? Do you go full in on it? Do you go like with the details?
Some detail. I've deliberately not put any pictures of death in there, or any black and white pictures at all. The pictures are black and white, but they're not all black and white pictures, because all the research shows that actually has a negative impact, particularly on a younger audience. If you do lectures on the Holocaust, the guidelines from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance are fairly clear. Avoid pictures of death, because a younger audience particularly will just see the dead bodies and naked bodies, and they won't hear anything else that's going on. So I've not gone into huge details of gore, but there are some details there, and certainly some of the survivor accounts talk of the horror of their experiences of what happened to them and what they witnessed. But I've looked also at some of the post-war experiments that tried to understand how people behaved in that way. The Stanford prison experiment, where students at Stanford University were allocated roles as prison officers and inmates, and within days they had to stop the experiment because the students who were prison staff, the warders, were brutalising the inmates, and the inmates were totally subjugated and broken. Wow. They had to stop the experiment within days. The Milgram experiment, where participants were convinced that they were safely electrocuting someone on the other side of a screen. So they'd ask this person questions, and if they gave a wrong answer, they pressed a button or pulled a lever that supposedly fired so many volts through that person.
Wow.
There was no electricity being passed. Ultimately, some of those participants were passing deadly doses of electricity through the person they believed was the other side of the screen because they were told it was okay. So that normalising of harm.
Rationalising what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, there was a fairly famous experiment by a grade school teacher in the United States in the late 1960s, Jane Elliott, who separated her children into brown eyes and blue eyes. So the blue-eyed children were told that they were the cleverest. They were the ones most likely to succeed. They were the ones who would achieve and do well. The brown-eyed children were told that they were life's failures. It was preordained because of the colour of their eyes. Within a couple of days, she changed that and said, oh, no, actually, I've got it wrong. It's the brown-eyed children who will be successful. What she noticed with those children during the period that they were told that their destiny was success or failure, they became that person. They became bold and upright.
A lot more confident, yeah.
Or they became subdued and cowed by their belief.
Oh, I guess it's the factories for me then for the rest of my life. Yeah.
So part of the reason for writing the Auschwitz book was to look at that and look at attitudes to refugees and migrants and people fleeing war and how they're perceived today and how some of the language of the past is used to describe them. Yeah. You know, vermin, rats, infestations, all those horrible, dehumanising terms.
I hated it with all this stuff of Libya and when they were describing the people fleeing the country there in Syria, from Syria through to Libya and then through into Italy, and they described it as like that. It was almost like they're getting closer. They're getting closer. Oh, they're at Calais now, and yeah, it's a language that's designed to kind of create panic in people, isn't it?
And well, it's the language. It's the language of hate. It's the rhetoric of hate. It's that dehumanising. It's awful, and particularly when you look at what people are fleeing, they're either fleeing horrible social circumstances that we can't comprehend in this country. We're pretty comfortable in this country. There are very few people who are absolutely destitute in this country. Some are, and that needs to be addressed. But by and large, most of us have got a roof over our head, and we've got some means of funding.
Well, there aren't bombs dropping on our head. That's for sure. I mean, there are a few issues with outreach in you know, across the whole country, but we've seen it more in Shrewsbury as well. But like you said, you're not getting artillery fired at you. You know, you're not getting murdered in the street because of the colour of your skin or, you know, what kind of god you follow. So yes, in the UK, we are kind of lucky. We are lucky. And that's what people want. They want sort of freedom. They want to be able to move around and live normal lives without being fired at. Is this something that you always wanted to do then? The life of an author. When you were younger, what did you want to do when you were older? Was this something you wanted to do?
No, it wasn't. I had no great aspirations as a youngster. I was a fairly typical old secondary modern school boy. I'd failed my 11 plus, went to secondary modern school, quietly ploughed my way.
Which school did you go to?
I went to Bass Church. So it's now the Corbett School.
Okay.
So on the outskirts of Shrewsbury, well, village 3-4 miles away from Shrewsbury.
Okay.
And I was a standard secondary modern school boy. I wasn't a high flyer. I wasn't overly successful. I did okay. I got a few CSEs. No one, I think, when I went to school, went to university. You can name 2 or 3 people within the 5-year period who went to university. It just wasn't the thing that happened in the mid-70s. We had expectations when we left school. You either went straight into work or you might go to college. So I went to what was Shrewsbury Tech, it's now SCAT, to do engineering qualifications for some bizarre reason, because I had no acumen for mechanics or engineering.
So I used to hear when I was in school, and that was like 2001. It was like, oh, you need a trade. You need to be a plumber. Go and be a plumber.
I had great plans to join the Navy, and I'd worked out that if I got so many O levels and other qualifications, I could go in as an officer cadet. So that to me was, a fast track to a bit more money and a bit more of a comfortable career. And they upped the requirements. So I did my time at Tech, and they upped the requirements, which meant going back for another year. And I wanted to earn money. So I was a labourer for a year. Back-breaking physical yakka that nearly killed me every day.
Sand in sandbags. Yeah. Quicker.
And then I fell into nursing. So in 1979, I'm not quite sure how I fell into it, but I did. I worked in the casualty department at the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital. That was the only casualty department for the whole county at the time. So everyone in Shropshire who needed A&E care came in there. Did that for a few months. I was a general nursing student for a while. Did a stint in mental health as a placement and fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Ended up leaving one training,
work.
Working in mental health care, and did so for 35 years from then on.
And I work in support. I work around support, and I realise that you do need a lot of empathy to do a job like, especially with mental health. You know, you're working with so many difficult situations that a lot of people would run a mile from. And what I get from you writing about Auschwitz is that you've listened to the victims of this, and you've that kind of empathy, that drive that makes you do what you did as a living, makes you want to understand them a bit more and take their word and kind of spread the word and say, look, these people, look, they went through a terrible thing. Is that right? Is that?
Oh yeah. Say with Auschwitz and the other camps from that period, there are very few survivors left now.
I imagine.
We're lucky that there are some still around who can give their account, and I've been blessed to meet many survivors and to have a close friendship with some. There are a few greater privileges in this world than to sit down with a survivor of Auschwitz as a friend.
I bet they got some amazing stories to tell.
And some of them are, well, all of them are beyond comprehension. What they experienced and saw and witnessed. Very few people today would be able to comprehend. And I'm not, on a podcast, I'm not going to go into details in some of the private conversations I've had with people of their experiences, because these conversations may be listened to at breakfast time or by children, and some of them are too distressing, but they're beyond comprehension. And when you hear those stories, anyone who writes about Auschwitz, and I'm blessed to know other people who've written about the Holocaust, it becomes a duty where all of us have a duty to history. We all have a duty to
make it right.
But if you've got an opportunity to write, you can use that to exercise your duty to help tell their story, to make sure their story continues.
Yeah.
If you've got an opportunity to speak to anyone, it's you exercising your duty to share their story orally rather than just in the written word.
And to put it into comprehension what they actually went through as well. Because you can write there and you can sit there and write, they had a terrible time. That doesn't explain anything, does it really?
No.
So like I was asking about, do you go into detail? You kind of have to. I expect in some regards. And so how did this happen then? So you spoke to some survivors from Auschwitz, and you decided to write a book. What did you do? What was the process then? Did you have to research, go places? How did it all begin?
I'd been researching for years anyway.
Yeah.
So a lot of the information I needed,
because it was interesting for you.
Yeah, I already had that information, and it was a case of knitting it together in book format. So with the Auschwitz book, from the moment I started writing it, I knew where I was going with it. When I did the introduction, I did it as a personal perspective from 37 years ago when I was first nursing in mental health care, when amongst the long stay patients we had in Shelton Hospital were survivors of the war in Europe. There were Eastern Europeans there, and amongst them were survivors of Nazi camps. We even had patients with tattoos on their arm, but they were classed just long stay, chronically mentally ill people who at the time were probably about the age I am now. But to me, as a 19, 20-year-old, they were ancient. So that was part of my initial first 20 pages of the book, was reflecting on that. And I knew where I was going with it. That book in some ways was easy to write because the structure was always there in my head.
Yeah.
I knew I had my own obligation to history to put something in writing. I knew it was never going to be the greatest seller in history, but at least I would have done my bit.
You've said what you wanted to say.
Yeah.
You've got it off your chest. I think I mean, like, I've done the thing before where, I mean, I've put it to one side, but I did it when as soon as I reached my late 20s, I was like, I'm going to write a book. And I wrote the synopsis for it, and I researched it, and then I put it to one side because I just wasn't brave enough to sit there and do it, go through the hours and hours of writing and the research, and I couldn't do it. So, I mean, hats off to you for doing that. Hey guys, how's it going? I thought this would be a great opportunity to tell you about an event that's happening in Shrewsbury in the next few days. On the 6th of November, there's a treasure hunt that's running through Shrewsbury. What a great way to get out and explore your town. This is being run by Sarah Hopper from the Ferndale Bed and Breakfast. You can find the activity sheet online if you go to www.ferndaleshrewsbury.co.uk/Shrewsbury-treasure-hunt. You can find the activity sheet there. It's basically a run of words with some of the words missing, and the only way to find the answers to those words is to go on the hunt and find out the answers. There's a message here from Sarah that says you can do it for fun, or send me the answers for a chance to win 4 10-pin bowling tickets. So for a chance to win, you and your family, a day out to 10-pin bowling, why not take part in this? And even if you don't win the main prize, you're also the winner because you get to walk around this great town. Good luck, Sarah, with this event. It sounds fantastic, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And congratulations to the winner in advance. I'd love to hear who wins it. Maybe we can get a picture of them, put them on the Shrewsbury Biscuit Facebook page. Well, thanks for that, guys, and back on with the show. So how's it going with these books? Like, how are they doing?
They're doing okay. I was lucky. It took me a fair while to get a publisher, and anyone who's tried to get a book published will know that's a bit of a journey. But getting a publisher actually was a bizarre completion of a weird circle. That with Rainer Hirst, who's obviously the grandson of the Commandant of Auschwitz, we were together in contact with a man called Ben Lesser, who wrote the foreword to the book that Rainer and I did together. Now, Ben Lesser is a Polish Jew from Krakow who survived Auschwitz. Ben and Rainer are friends, so Ben has dedicated years to educating about the past. He discovered Rainer, the grandson of the Commandant, was doing the same work, and they'd become close friends. So we had this weird connection between the grandson of the Commandant and a survivor of the camp that his grandson's grandfather had run. Ben's daughter put us in contact with another man, an entrepreneur in Las Vegas, who put us in contact with another man who's a publisher in America. And the entrepreneur and the publisher all have a Jewish history and some link to the Holocaust. There's this weird circle from grandson to survivor to others who've been linked to the Holocaust that put us in contact with the publisher. They agreed to publish all the books that I've written, but the American model is very much digital rather than paper, although the books are available on print on demand. The American market is mainly ebooks. They're doing okay. The last I'd heard, within the first 10 months, in excess of 8,000 books have been sold, which is okay for a first-time author.
As a creator, you just want people to enjoy the thing that you've made. If I mean, for me, making a podcast, this podcast, for example, if we entertain or people enjoy it, say a dozen people enjoy it, I'm happy, because, that's the goal, isn't it? I don't need 1 million people to listen to this podcast, as long as the people that do enjoy it, Have you had good feedback from the books? Have people wrote to you and said they enjoyed it?
It's been nice. The nicest feedback has been from survivors.
Yeah.
I'm blessed with one survivor in particular, and I won't embarrass her by naming her on here, but she's had copies of all 3 books, and her feedback has been wonderful, and that's so rewarding. Writing books, same as doing a podcast. I think very few people are going to get financially comfortable from writing books. Although these have sold a reasonable amount, the income for me has been negligible. Digital books don't make money for authors, but it's nice to know that people have taken the time to purchase them and read them. The survivor, who I've not named, has done talks around the world, and she'll often say that if she talks to 100 people, if 10 of those 100 go away having listened and thinking and continue to think about the content of the talk, she's achieved a result.
Yeah.
And for me, if 8,000 copies have been sold and only 80 of those have made people change their mindset or made them think or made them research further, then that's a result for me.
It makes it worth it. I mean, like there's previous shows that I've worked on, and you look at the figures and you're like, oh, okay, well, at least I tried. But then you get a letter through or a message or an email or something that somebody's thanking you for you making their day a bit better, and you're really humbled by it. You're like, oh, well, let's carry on doing it then, because it makes it worth it. And with publishers, it is difficult, because when I was writing my book, I was so cocksure. I was kind of like, yes, I've got an amazing idea. People are going to want to buy it off me. So I was ringing up publishers, emailing people, and they got back and they were like, yes, so that's going to be £2,500. And I was like, what? You want me to pay you for my idea? And that kind of threw me a bit. So, that was kind of scary. So what have you got in the pipeline at the moment? Are you writing stuff at the moment?
The pipeline at the moment, I'm not writing any more books at the minute. When I retired in 2016 from nursing, I have to say I was lucky that I could take early retirement because of my status as a mental health nurse. That was almost immediately followed by starting an MA. So I'm coming to the end of that, and I'm sort of up to my eyeballs in dissertations. I'm doing some work on an event called the Holodomor, which very few people know about. It's classed as a genocide of the peasant population of Ukraine in 1932, 1933.
Okay. How do you say that? What's it called?
The Holodomor, Holodomor.
Okay.
And it's from Ukrainian. It means terror hunger, I think.
Okay.
So it sounds like Holocaust, but it's a different linguistic root. It was an enforced famine on the peasant population of Ukraine. Some 4 million people died.
I remember hearing about
2
this.
years.
It's terrible. Yeah.
It got very little publicity because it was of the Soviet regime. Just history was hidden. I'm working on that a bit in part. I've been honoured to be asked to give a talk at Coventry Cathedral in November at an event that's been organised by the Ukrainian community. So the rabbi of a synagogue that I go to occasionally was contacted by the chief rabbi, who was seeking a speaker to help these people with this event, and my name got put forward. I sent some stuff to the organisers, and they said, yes, thank you very much, please do that. And I thought, to do justice to that speech, and it might only be a 10-15 minute speech in a bigger event, I at least had to research the Holodomor. So I've been doing quite a bit on that. Whether more will come of that research, I don't know. I think my main focus will be do the speech and then focus on the dissertation, and from the dissertation there might be another book comes from that.
How do you do that though? How do you go into a talk? So like you're about to speak to say 100, 200 people, and you go, right, genocide, and go. How do you do that? Do you have to get yourself into the mindset, or does it just come natural for you? I'm
lucky. I'm not by nature greatly self-confident. I've managed to talk myself into being confident in certain settings.
This is a familiar story.
In part, my old job, the last 22 years of the job, I had to give evidence in court virtually every day. So I had to stand up in front of magistrates and judges and give them information about people they were dealing with to help them with the decision-making process. Anyone who's even sat in a court just to observe will find the experience fairly nerve-wracking. If you've got to stand up and talk, it's terrifying. And I learned early on that I was talking gibberish to the magistrates and judges because I really didn't know the rules. I had to learn the rules, and then I became confident in what I was doing. A sideline of my nursing career was an educational role that with colleagues, often and sometimes on my own, standing in front of groups of people to teach about certain subjects linked to my work or that were relevant to their clinical role. There's a way of almost building up confidence. If you do that often enough, it becomes doable. So talking about genocide in front of a group of people is doable because I hopefully turn up with some elements of knowledge that audience doesn't have. And I'm there to impart that knowledge and share it and make it a useful experience for them, whether it's for 10 minutes, an hour, whether it's...
And I suppose they've looked at the posters on the door before they've come in, and they know what's coming, so they're not going to be like, oh, that's horrific. Like, they know what's coming, they know so that kind of helps, I suppose. And we were talking before we recorded about Footsteps. What's this? What is Footsteps?
What is Footsteps? Footsteps at the minute primarily is a Facebook page and a website. So the website, www.footstepsonline.com. That's about the only one I can remember. Myself and Rainer Hurst, the grandson of the Commandant, and others created Footsteps in late 2014. So in part it was in readiness for us all attending Auschwitz for the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. The idea of Footsteps is to remember the footsteps of people who walked suffering and death at the hands of the Nazis, particularly in Auschwitz, but in other camps. So we use footsteps particularly to remember where their feet had been, but also to ensure that we remember the past and learn the lessons from the past. So challenging hate today, speaking for the oppressed, remembering other genocides that have been acknowledged, genocides that have yet to be acknowledged, because there are genocides going on now that the United Nations hasn't really got a handle on in Myanmar. Ongoing problems with ISIS in areas of Iraq and Syria, the problems in Syria with the Assad regime and the Russian support will, I suspect, at some point be viewed as genocidal. So, there are events happening around the world today that need to be acknowledged and remembered. And what we sought to do with Footsteps was just to provide a platform where we could share information, where we could encourage people to think, and where it would be a safe place for people of a similar mindset to visit a page, visit a website, and find sources of information, not just about the people who are involved with Footsteps and what we're doing, but also our thinking and thoughts on some of the issues around the world.
So do you gather quite a few crowds for that then? Is it quite a big popular thing?
It's not huge. We one of the difficulties with Footsteps is that the main people involved with it, myself in England, Rainer in Germany, friend Simona in the Netherlands, another woman Inga in Germany. So we're spread across 3 countries, and that causes geographical difficulties. The main focus has always been, for people who visit the website and the page, has been Rainer Hurst, understandably, because of who he is and his background. And he's, certainly in continental Europe, is already well known as a person who openly challenges hate. So
do you encourage people to go there that just have like an interest in what these things are, or is it more for people that have been affected by this? So if someone was, say, interested in trying to help the situations that are going on in Syria, trying to understand it a bit more, would you encourage people just to come and just poke their heads through and see what's going on, or how does it work?
We encourage people to contact us, and none of us will ever claim to have all the answers, but most of us can access someone who may have answers.
It's a great place to have a mature conversation about it without someone going, "Oh, get them all out," or getting a bit irate, and that's I think that's exactly what we need. We need a format of talking about this, about people losing their minds, because they do. We talked about that before. So, like, when you're, like I said, I'm a creator. People look at podcasts and like, who is a podcast? But there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of planning, and there's a lot of editing going involved. And sometimes it's great just to switch off the computer, turn off my phone, and just relax and do probably nothing. Sit on an Xbox or read a book or something. When you're researching for your MA and things like this, what do you like to do to relax? Is there anything that you prefer to do, hobbies or anything like that?
I'm not a great hobby person. My hobby is always, one of them has always been reading.
Oh, there you go.
I love non-fiction stuff. So the MA fits in with a hobby as well. But I have to switch off from that. You can't spend all day.
You burn yourself, even if it's a passion. You burn yourself out.
All day, every day about genocide isn't healthy.
No.
Simple things, just relaxing. Walking with my dog, popping into town, enjoying Shrewsbury. Even if it's just for an hour.
I love walking around
Shrewsbury. It's therapeutic. Going to Attingham Park, walking along the River Severn, walking around the quarry.
The Quarry is one of the best places to go, I think, to wind down. Unless you drag in along a 3-year-old who's learning to ride a bike and likes to complain about everything. Even then, it's fun.
Been there.
You got to turn the pedals round and round, son, round and round. Keep going, and then stop. No, yeah, it's quite fun. It's great just to be able to get out and just to think about anything but writing anything about a Holocaust, or in my case, podcasts. And I've always got a bunch of cards as well. Do you want to come on my podcast? You know, in case I see someone. I'll tell you what, right? You've got a list of books here. Let's give your books a plug. Let's give people a name to these books, so that if they do want to go and check them out, you can. I've just looked as well. They're on Amazon if you want to download them on digital. That's right, yeah.
They're available digital or print on demand.
Yeah,
The price, I have to say, with the print on demand was set by the publishers, not me. So probably more than I would charge. But if people have got access to Kindle, potentially you can get them for free, depending on whether you've got Kindle Unlimited. So there are 3 books. The first one, Auschwitz-Birkenau From Hell to Hope, and hope is followed by a question mark, and that to me is integral to the title. It's do we have hope?
Yeah, isn't yeah.
And that's a non-academic look at the history of Auschwitz, the Holocaust, the people involved, some survivor accounts, some of the post-war experiments, and then looking at some of the attitudes to minority groups today with that question mark of hope.
So you don't need a degree in diplomacy to be able to read it. You can just pick it up, read it.
It was aimed, from the moment I wrote it, mainly at people who may have limited knowledge on the subject. So it wasn't, in-depth, heavy-duty academic book. It was, let's just get the basics out there so as you can understand and grasp the reality of what went on, but also give food for thought on some of the broader issues post-Holocaust. So that's the first one. The second one I wrote last year, Tribalism and Prejudice, the Far Right and Lessons from History, is looking at the rise of populist nationalism, the far right, to a degree referring to the Holocaust and the genocide in Bosnia for comparative purposes of the attitudes that prevailed in the Holocaust and in Bosnia, and looking at who's susceptible, who's receptive to far right propaganda and far left propaganda. Both extremes can be fairly intolerant, and what, if anything, we can do to try and challenge that. So it doesn't claim to have all the answers. It certainly raises a lot of questions, and the idea of the book was to inform people and empower them to look at
and provoke them into thinking about these things as well.
So hopefully that'll do that job. And the third one is more of a booklet. It's called A Kinship of Purpose, and it's written jointly by myself and Rainer Herz. And when we wrote that, we saw it primarily as almost like a manual of tolerance. So it's not academic, it's not heavy duty, it's looking at how all of us are empowered to challenge hate, to be a voice in the crowd that can make a difference. And we're blessed with that book to have a wonderful foreword from Ben Lesser, who I mentioned earlier, who survived Auschwitz. With the Auschwitz book, I'm also blessed to have a wonderful foreword from Kitty Hart Moxon, who I encourage anyone to research her online. She is one of the finest survivors of the Holocaust, who has dedicated the best part of 60 years to educating about the Holocaust and making sure that lessons are learned.
I like to torture myself with movies every now and again. Watch a real tearjerker. I am a big girl when it comes to movies, and I cry at everything. I've cried at Batman before. I kid you not. And I watched the Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Have you seen that movie?
I've seen it. It's a film that serves a purpose. Historically, it's not great. And historians would advise against it. It's actually I think it's been shown to be the most read book on the Holocaust for people under the age of 16, and it's one of the most viewed films on the Holocaust. But it's by virtue of the story is untrue. It can't be true. It's fiction, but it's based on Auschwitz. And it's based on the Hearst family, who had a villa on the outskirts of Auschwitz main camp. The boy in the camp wouldn't have been there. He'd have been dead within 45 minutes of arrival. So straight away, it's fiction.
Okay.
Children that young were killed soon after they arrived in the camp.
Oh, terrible.
But it serves a purpose. It gets people to think.
I'll tell you what, that's one of the first films, not one of the first films, one of the few films, I should say, that, yes, it made me cry like a child at Christmas that had no toys or presents. But it made the room kind of shrink a size. I was kind of, that's horrific. They were playing that music and things. And I suppose, like you said, it had a purpose. It made you try, and it was designed to display the horrific nature of Auschwitz, I suppose, or of this thing. So yeah, guys, make sure you go and check out those books. And if Simon does decide to write something new, we will definitely feature it again on a future show. Thank you for coming on. It's been a really nice chat. We've done 50 minutes already. I told you guys.
I would say as well, I mean, I've never sought to make money out of these books. If they sell, it's great. And I've never sought to make money out of whatever I do since. If I get a job, great. But for now, I'm enjoying retirement. But if people visit my author page on Facebook and contact me directly, if anyone is organising an event where they want a speaker, for some tea and biscuits, I'll come and do it. I'm happy to come along.
That's fantastic. So if you guys would, I mean, where would what kind of facility are we talking? Nursing homes? Would they be a good place to kind of go and speak to people? Churches, maybe? I mean, where would you?
Anyone who's interested in the Holocaust, who's interested in learning the lessons of the past. So it could be any of those. As long as all I ask is, if they've got a projector and somewhere I can plug a PowerPoint in, and some space and a receptive audience that can cope with an hour or so of me talking in front of a room, I'll come along. Yeah,
we were in touch with a few people. I mean, there might be a few people listening to that. I think that's a great idea. What do you think about your audience? Do you find a lot of younger people coming to speak to you about this? Do you speak to a few?
People who contact me are mixed. I'm lucky, and I don't think it's generally reflective of people who are interested in the Holocaust, that a lot of people who are contacting me are my age and a similar age. If you talk to survivors of the Holocaust, they almost universally will say that the most difficult audience for them to reach are middle-aged and older. Because they know it all. They're not interested. Their favourite audience is younger audiences, from 16 upwards, who are receptive and ask questions and generally appear to genuinely
have more time as well. Have more time available, because I mean the middle-aged people, they're kind of busy people. They go run a house, go to work, come back, and barely have time to watch an episode of their favorite show before they go to bed or something. So I guess that kind of applies a lot to learning about something. So
and also with younger people, where it's not compulsory, but it's on the curriculum, and it should be in KS3, I think, within the curriculum. But Holocaust education is taught in schools today. Where it's taught and how it's taught varies from school to school, but there are guidelines that are issued by, in this country, by the Holocaust Educational Trust and others. So younger people get Holocaust education. People 40 and above, by and large, didn't have Holocaust education in school. It wasn't a subject that was covered. So younger people, at the right age, when they're being taught history, are being taught about the Holocaust, and they tend to be receptive when they hear or see a survivor. It has a powerful impact from them.
I think during school you kind of revisit World War II on quite a few occasions. I mean, I was walking around a primary school just yesterday looking for one for my little boy, and the kids, possibly, I think they were year 4 or 5. They were learning World War II, and I guess it's baby steps into the kind of what happened. World War. When I was in secondary school, they go full in, like, this is what happened, and this is what the atrocities, what humans are capable of. And it's quite daunting when you're young, but then it, like you said, it fuels an interest. You might want to pursue that, so that's great. And as well, you need to remember that, like you said, there's only a few Holocaust survivors left, as well as people that fought in World War II. We're only going to have access to this knowledge for a short amount of time. So we need to get there and get as much information as possible. So you're doing a good service, sir. And I wish you all the best with all your books and your talks. This Footsteps thing sounds amazing. I'd love to come to one at some point. Maybe we can pop our heads in and take a look at it. I'm going to, at the end of all of our shows, I'm going to ask our guests, what does Shrewsbury mean to you?
It's home, and it's where I can relax and feel safe, and just enjoy. I recently we had a friend over from Holland, and you don't always appreciate your own town until you give a tour.
Yeah.
Until you show the abundance of restaurants and cafes and that lovely cafe culture that we've got in the town, of the very old buildings and the moderately old buildings, the historically significant buildings, the basis for the first skyscraper in the world, wrapped in plastic and scaffolding on the edge of Didlington. The castle, the black and white buildings, the beauty of the quarry and the dingle, the loop of the river, the views, the friendliness, the safety of the town. It's when you give a tour of the town that you realise just how special it is. We think we know, but bring someone from out of town here and give them a tour. And I think anyone who's listening, who's from Shrewsbury, who knows a reasonable amount about their own town, get them to give a tour to someone else.
Yeah.
And you see it. I occasionally bump into people in town who look lost. We all do. You'll see someone with a map who's come from another town or another country. And the amount of times I've stopped and said, you're lost, you know where you're going. And you're the fourth person who's asked me that.
Yeah.
And that, I think, speaks volumes about Shrewsbury, that, someone who's lost, by and large, can expect someone to come up and offer to help. It's not a perfect town. It's got its problems. We mentioned, the awful and sad situation with homeless people in Shrewsbury. And I hope a compassionate and decent solution is found to that. So it's not a perfect town. And it has its crime and, slightly rougher spots, the same as everywhere else, but it's also quite magical.
I find the town changing me as well. I mean, this is a funny little story. I was waiting to go in a meeting. I was outside Windsor Place, and outside the parade, there's this elderly gentleman wandering around, and he was literally wandering around doing a U-turn, coming back, wandering around doing a U-turn, coming back. I was like, this guy's lost. I need to go and speak to him. So I was doing the thing, walking up. I was about to speak to him, and then he turned the device he was holding in his hand, and he was playing Pokemon Go. And I was like, yes, you go, man. And he's easily in his 80s. So I was like, yes, you go.
Wonderful.
He's getting his exercises, going out, and he's catching those Pokemon. So, yeah. Thank you, Simon, for coming on the show. We'll, if you got something coming out soon, we'll definitely come back on the show. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Show number 1, interview number 1 for the Shrewsbury Biscuit.
I feel greatly honoured. Thank you very much.
It's fine. Guys, if I could ask you just to give this episode a bit of a like and a share and get the good word out there, because this show is not just designed to promote Shrewsbury, it's also to let people of Shrewsbury listen to the warm stories about their town. If you want to get in touch with me about any stories, if you want to add anything to what we've talked about today, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and we're at the Shrewsbury Biscuit podcast. On Twitter, we are at Shrewsbury B1, because they wouldn't let us have the Shrewsbury Biscuit podcast. It was too long. So yeah, make sure you get in touch with us on social media, give us a like and share, and make sure you join us next week. So thank you very much. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.